mapping visualizations for healthcare. So this is just going to be a brief overview and introduction to Power BI basic mapping visualizations and how it can be applied to healthcare settings. So to start off, there's a few different types of map visualizations that you can use in Power BI. There are basic maps, filled maps, and ArcGIS maps. And for the purpose of this video, we're just going to be focusing on the basic map visualization. So basic maps are great because they're easy to use and they're fully supported by Power BI. They make it very clear to visualize geographic and numerical relationships. So you get a really good sense of how certain locations may affect certain data points and how that can solve problems in healthcare. One thing that's very important for basic maps to function properly is that you need to have very clearly formatted location information in order for this to function the right way. These maps are powered by Bing and they pull their information directly from the internet. So when you upload your data set, it has to be formatted properly. It's also important to note that you need to be connected to the internet in order for these maps to work. If you do not have a strong internet connection, the data will not be able to be pulled from Bing and the map portion of Power BI will not work. So that's also important to note. Before you start using the map visualizations, it's important to ask a few questions about how this is beneficial. So in general, is it important to use mapping for your research? As I mentioned before, this is really good for geospatial relationships. So looking at how quantity relates to a location and whether demographic or a certain area really affects something that you might be looking into. So is a trend being strongly affected by a certain area? Is it stronger in one location versus the other? So applying this specifically to healthcare, you can compare health data with census information in a given location. So maybe looking at certain demographics and how they might be disproportionately affected with diseases, whether certain groups of people or locations have access to healthcare or where there might be gaps, and whether certain diseases are more prominent in different geolocations. So just to list a few examples. So, as you begin, it's really important to prepare your data properly to be used for these map visualizations. And as I mentioned before, it's very important that they're geocoded correctly. So are you including the correct zip code, city, state, or maybe latitude and longitude? And also, are these location points meaningful? So are there enough data points included that you'll be able to recognize trends? Will you be able to really tell if there's a difference between locations or whether it's just anecdotal in your data set? We will now move over to Power BI, where we will give a quick example of how you can start to prepare your data to use the map visualization tool. For this example, we're going to be pulling a data set, and we're going to start by bringing it in. And to do that, we're going to select Get Data, and we're going to choose Excel. And there's the data set, so we'll let that load. And for this example, we're just going to be using one table. And we can see that this is a geolocation table, so it has the city, state, country, and then a whole lot of numerical data that we can link to those specific locations. So we're going to click Load. Before we get started, it's really important that you go over to this Data tab and you make sure that some of our geolocation information is categorized properly. So to do that, you select this Modeling tab and you're going to click the column that you'd like to categorize. So right now the city needs to be categorized correctly so it recognizes that it's geolocation data. So we'll choose city. For state, we will choose state or province, and for country, we will select country. And that's really important, so you can tell it's worked when you go over to your data on the side, and it has these little globe icons, and that is just to confirm that those are in fact geolocation data. So we can go over to our Report tab again, And from here, we can pull up a map. And when we click into them, these should be recognized as proper location information, which they are. Another way that you can search by location is by using longitude and latitude. And so to do that, we will pull a different data set, one I've already loaded in. And for this one, while it includes information about city and state, they also include information about latitude and longitude. And this can make it easier to pull up on a map sometimes. But once again, we need to make sure that these are formatted correctly. So we'll go over to modeling. We will select data category, and we will select latitude and longitude. Okay. Now that we've got that categorized, we can go back over to our report and we can pull a map in. And so like I said, for this video, we will just be focusing on the basic map. So we will select one, increase its size a little bit, and then we will begin to pull in our data. So we're going to start with location, and we'll do that by pulling in the latitude and longitude. And once again, you can see that these are correctly coded as geodata by that small icon right there of the globe. So we will pull latitude and longitude. And as you can see, that took us right into Ohio where our data is centered. And if you don't see that picture clearly right away, you may have to go in and switch the formatting. And it's important that you select Don't Summarize. And same with longitude, you want to make sure that it is not summarized so that it is displaying those correctly. So as you can see from this map, what we're looking at right now are specific locations of each of these hospitals around the state. So other than location, we aren't getting a lot of information there right now, but you can start to pull in some of this other data to get a better understanding of how some of this information may relate to that specific geolocation. One way that we can make this data a little bit easier to understand is to use some of these tools down here. So looking specifically at the size field, what we can do is pull in some of this data from the side. So for this set specifically, we're going to be looking at total discharges, and this data has to do with the number of discharges that occurred in a given year at any of these hospitals around the state. So we will move this over into size, and you can see pretty quickly that it has affected the size of each of these different bubbles representing a hospital. So this just makes it easier to see relative to different hospital locations how many discharges they had. As you can see down here in Athens, they had 521 hospital discharges, which is relatively small when you look at a larger bubble such as this one, where they had 4,015. So that's one way that you can begin to kind of understand trends in different areas as they apply to these different hospital locations. Map some more context, it might be helpful if we pull in some more information over here. So we're going to be focusing now on this legend field, and we're going to pull in provider name. And what this is going to do is color code each of those locations so they're a little bit easier to tell apart. And as you scroll over each one, it's also going to give that provider name, so that gives a little bit more context to the latitude and longitude. And you might also find it helpful to add a slicer. So we'll click out of that map and we will drag in a slicer over here to the right. And let's say we wanted to search specifically for one of these provider names. Let's say we hadn't had the legend filled in. You can pull provider name over into this slicer and we'll format it as a dropdown. And you could select a specific item on the map if you wanted to look at just one location. So that will take you in, here's ProMedica Bay Park Hospital. And that will give you more specific information without the context of the larger map.